Well, hello, Saints. Good morning to you. I hope you're already enjoying the fellowship that you're experiencing at our house sessions today. And I really appreciate your flexibility to be able to meet in homes. I don't think we're really penalized when we do that because it really becomes a more of an intimate and fun time. Sometimes it's actually good to get out of the hotel once in a while and get back into the sunlight, I think. Um, so, with that, I should just give a quick reminder that we really want you to begin to pay attention to the newsletter. Next week, I do believe we'll be at the Marriott. Not sure which room. The 2 weeks after that, we won't be. The first of those 2 weeks will be in house sessions like we are today. And then the following week, we're going to attempt to have everybody gather at one house, which will be Pastor Jeremiah and Pastor Susie's home. And we'll see if we can put together a big gathering there. Then I believe we're back at the Marriott for Mother's Day. And then that following week, which I think might be the 17th, we will be at Elver Park. And then I believe we finish up the month of May at the Marriott, and we're not sure about June yet. However, we are praying earnestly that the Lord would open up a door of opportunity for us to secure a place of our own. The reason I would really prefer that, but if the Lord doesn't see fit to do it at this time, I'm sure we can get everything done that He's asking us to. But I would really like to have opportunities to have some of the things go on during the midweek that I think would be really useful. Besides Operation Solid Lives, our discipleship program, women's ministry that will be kicking off here again pretty soon, just midweek services. I would love to invite some guest speakers to hold some seminars and things like that. So it'd be useful to have a building. So I encourage you to just not necessarily use your mind to try to figure out how to solve this problem, but just pray that God would reveal it to us. And maybe one day we'll just all of a sudden wake up and say, well, duh, should have done that a long time ago. Or I think more likely we will see something that was hidden and now revealed, and we'll be able to move into that. But the Lord has good plans for us and a great future, and I'm excited about it. Well, we're going to continue our study really in the book of Revelation, but I'm actually going to jump out of the book of Revelation and just spend a moment in Matthew 24 and 25. We visited that chapter before. This is really the first end time teaching in the New Testament that Jesus gives himself. And so it parallels how I see Revelation unpacking itself. And it really is Jesus' outline of his return. So we're going to take a quick look at that. The way it's set up is Jesus is near the end of his ministry, and he's hanging around Jerusalem. And it's obvious that the religious leaders in Jerusalem have a very different view of future events than Jesus does. They're still going to wait for Messiah, and Jesus is saying, I'm already here, and this was my first visit, and there's a second one coming, and it's not going to be as you think either. So the disciples, when they go out to the Mount of Olives and they're spending some time with Jesus, they actually ask him the question, well, how do you see it happening? And so Jesus begins to unpack that. And it reads kind of like this, beginning in Matthew 24, verse 3. And he sat on the Mount of Olives. The disciples came to him privately, saying, tell us, when will these things be, and what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age? So in a sense, I feel like they asked him three questions. Question 1, when will these things be? Question 2, what will be the sign of your coming? And question 3, what will be the sign of the end of the age? So we're going to just break those down and give a little answer out of what will be his response to them. Interestingly enough, too, of all the questions that were asked of Jesus, and we don't have every question that was asked recorded, but of the ones we do have recorded, this is about the lengthiest answer he gives to a question that is asked him. So the disciples were very interested in knowing about Jesus' second coming, and he was very willing to tell them, as best as he could, what to look for and how to prepare. And so it's interesting to me that much of the church spends little time reviewing the answer Jesus gave to these questions when he was so willing to give such a lengthy answer. But we're changing that, and we're going to look into this right now. Oh, by the way, I hope you have your notes. They're online. They're connected to the newsletter, and you're always welcome to download those, bring them along, and write in the margins. I try to leave plenty of room for you to take notes too. All right, first question. The disciples asked, when will these things be? What Jesus outlines as events that will take place, in my opinion, parallel what the Apostle John received in his revelation from Jesus concerning the opening of the seals and the events that unfold in the book of Revelation. And one of the clues, though, that Jesus gives as far as when will these things be, I think, is found in Matthew 24, verse 32 through 35, and it reads like this. From the fig tree learn its lesson. As soon as its branch becomes tender and puts out its leaves, you know that summer is near. So also when you see all these things, you know that it is near at the very gates. Truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. Well, Jesus says a couple things here. One is, when you begin to see the signs that I'm telling you, all those events can be contained within the parameters of one generation. So when these end time events begin to happen, they take place pretty quickly. And the generation that finds itself witnessing these events, if you're young, you're likely to be that generation that will witness his return. So he's not talking about thousands of years. He's talking about a generation in time. Another thing that Jesus shares with us in this is to look at the fig tree, which often represents the nation of Israel. And many scholars believe this is in fact the case. One, because it's so unlikely that after almost 2,000 years, a people group scattered all over the earth would gather together and come back to its promised land. Well, Israel, the only nation on the planet that has ever done that, in fact did do that. In fact, I've heard it said that if you divide a people group and they lose their identity within 3 generations, they're no longer a people group. They'll be assimilated by other groups. There's probably times when the Jewish people would like to have been assimilated, but it hasn't been allowed to happen, probably as much as they chose for it to not happen. But at any rate, when you see Israel come back as a nation, that could be the kickoff time for that generation to see all things fulfilled. And, there's variations on how long a generation is, and that's not that important. It's not 1,000 years. A generation is likely to be less than 100 years. And Israel kind of came back to their land in 1917. Well, we're approaching 2017, which happens to be the year that we see that constellation in Revelation 12 take place. Or it could be when Israel became a nation in 1948 into 1949. And it could be a generation away from that. Could be the generation when they took back the Temple Mount and secured all of Jerusalem under their jurisdiction in 1967. But at any rate, a generation could be 40 years, 100 years, but we know it's close, and we are those people. So we should be paying attention. So when will these things be? Well, Jesus pointed to the fig tree and that generation. Another question that was asked, what will be the sign of your coming? In Matthew 24, 27 through 31, Jesus gives this explanation. For as the lightning comes from the east and shines as far as the west, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. Wherever the corpse is, there the vultures will gather. Now, let me just pause on that for a second. For as lightning comes from the east and shines as far as the west, so will the coming of the Son of Man. Wherever the corpse is, there the vultures will gather. Some interesting things were said even in here. Jesus preceded this little portion of his answer with things like false Christs will show up everywhere. And then false Christs will go out into the desert and say, come here. And others will go and watch them and see signs and hear their words and be moved by that and will invite others to come out. And Jesus says, when you see that happening, don't go. Don't bother. My coming will not look like that. In fact, he said, my coming will be so pronounced, it will be like a lightning strike that covers the sky from the east to the west. It will not be missed, and it will not be misunderstood. It will be noticed. It will be a global event, and it will put an end to all false Christ teachings, charades, and everything else that they do. And it's at that time, in my opinion, that everyone on the earth will know that every event that takes place from this time on is, in fact, a result of God's wrath and at the hand of the Messiah during the day of vengeance of our God. The kings of the earth, we find later in Revelation, know exactly what is going on. They know it's the wrath of God, and they try to hide from it, but they can't. So once Jesus, the sign of his coming, appears in the sky, from that time on, there is no more deception. There is just actual God dealing with the affairs on this planet. So Jesus makes that pretty clear. It's like a lightning that flashes across the sky. You could be in a deep sleep, and you will see, even with your eyes closed, like we did this week, lightning streak across the sky and wake up and know something took place. That's what Jesus is saying it's like. And then he continues and he says, so will the coming of the Son of Man. The sign of his coming is his coming. That's important to remember. The sign of his coming is he's the one who comes. He doesn't send a forerunner. It's not, it doesn't come to a slow boil. It's an event that takes place, and it's him. It's him coming. And he says, I'm the sign. I myself am the sign. And then he gives this proverb that was popular in his day. The proverb is, wherever the corpse is, there the vultures will gather. The idea of this is there's no such thing as a corpse laying on the ground where the vultures will not gather. It's as sure as if you have one side of a coin, you have the other side of a coin. You can't have a coin with only one side. It always has two sides. If you have a corpse, you have a vulture. Jesus is saying, as surely as the vultures gather around a corpse, so all the earth will see and understand my coming. And then he's also, the implication is there, where there is moral corruption without repentance, like a vulture, divine judgment comes. That's why all the kings of the earth and all the wicked who remain after the rapture takes place know exactly what's going on. It is payback for their unrepentant sinfulness, moral misbehavior, and propagating evil and darkness in the world. They know it, and they have nowhere to go. So Jesus is telling, this is what it's going to be like. And then he puts these three things in the setting of this. Immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Then will appear in heaven the sign of the Son of Man. And then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And he will send out his angels with a loud trumpet call, and they will gather his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. The nations mourn because they can no longer deceive the people of the earth. They have been exposed with the brightness of Jesus' coming, and there's no place to hide, as I mentioned earlier. He says, immediately after the tribulation of those days, there will be a cosmic witness to my coming, like lightning flashing across the sky, where the sun will be darkened and the moon will not give its light. The stars will fall from heaven and the powers of heaven will be shaken. This is a serious cosmic event that is taking place here. It is drastically changing and altering the earth as we know it. Revelation adds to this that there'll be a great earthquake where the great cities of all the earth will be laid in ruins. Shorelines will be redone. Mountains will be made low. Valleys will be raised into new mountain ranges. Every map that presently exists will probably be useless at that time. And this will take place in an intense moment of time where these changes will abruptly take place. It is a cosmic and earthly clash of events that take place. It's a big thing. It's predicted. It's going to happen. And we are already seeing the signs of this coming, beginning with, and nothing else, the fig tree, Israel, coming back as a nation. The glory of God will be being revealed as Jesus comes, and we see this great event. And the way I'm interpreting this is there will be times of tribulation and persecution and hardship. And then he says, immediately after the tribulation of those days, when the angels come to gather the church and the elect, and they take them from the four winds. The four winds, in my opinion, are the first four seals that are blowing on the earth. False religion and antichrist rising up. We have wars and rumors of war and civil unrest and chaos going. We have famine and economic collapse, and probably when the mark of the beast is working its way into buying and selling. And then we have the martyrs that are being martyred for their lives and the things that they have done. That as we're seeing that happen, and we already are seeing those things happen, it says that the martyrs are crying out, and then great tribulation comes. And in this great tribulation, the saints are gathered out of that. And it is at this time then that God unleashes the cosmic events that will literally consume the world. It's interesting to point out, I was studying 2 Peter today, and 2 Peter talked about the first time the earth went through a tribulation event and a cosmic event, it produced water and a flood that judged the world and annihilated sinfulness and wickedness. The second time Peter says this happened, it will be with fire from the sky that will burn and purge the earth. It'll be judgment no less than the first one, but a different means. And here Jesus is explaining this, that that's what it will be like. Now, I have in your notes the sequence of the seals that take place, and you can refer to those just to remind you of that. But then we come to the third question where the disciples ask, what will be the sign of the end of the age? So the first question is, when will these things be? When will they begin to happen? And we use the fig tree, Israel becoming a nation, to kick off our timeline. What will be the sign of your coming? And I just stated some of the events that will take place in that. And then they ask the question, what will be the sign of the end of the age? Now, it's interesting that as Jesus begins to continue his discourse, talking to his disciples about this, he starts talking in parables about how to be ready. And the real sign of that we talked about was the fig tree, which is a sign of the end of the age. But what Jesus says, if you really want to put a fine point on it, here's the fine point of when I'm coming. Just be ready. Be ready. He said in Matthew 24:44, therefore you must be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect. Well, we can know the signs, but we don't know specifically when he's coming. And then again, I said Jesus uses several parables to describe how to be ready. The fig tree. When you see the fig tree, Israel returning to its promised land, wake up. And some people will say, well, that was a long time ago. It was in your lifetime or close to it. Be ready. And then he says to be ready. Another thing he says, he gives an illustration of the faithful and unfaithful servant. He says that he had these servants, and when the delay seemed to take a long time, one of the servants became unfaithful. And so the Lord divided these servants. And I don't know if this is the application, but I liken that to the church. The church is this servant that has been called, and all of a sudden we have a division between faithful and unfaithful. Those who continue in the faith and press forward to see and expect and work as a servant of the Lord at his second coming, and those who begin to say it's not real, it's never going to happen, it's just all allegory, and we should just do our thing. And we see this division. Jesus said that's a sign, and when you see that, be ready. Another one is he gives us the wise and the foolish virgins. Here I see too what would represent the church. The church, people who are attempting to keep themselves pure, waiting for their groom to come, but 5 of them just run out of gas, run out of a passion of the Holy Spirit, run out of just desiring to live right, desiring to pay attention. And then you have the 5 that are saying, we still believe, we're still going to keep ourselves ready, and we're still longing for his coming. Jesus says, when you see that happen, when you see those in the church who believe but now are just losing their faith, or perhaps are just running out of gas, he says that's a sign. Be ready. That's a sign of the end of the age. He gives another one, the parable of the talents, where he talks about those who are faithful. And he makes a shift here where he says, if you are given gifts, if you use them to serve the kingdom, you'll be rewarded. If you hide your talents and use them on yourselves, or just don't use them to serve the kingdom, when I come back, I will evaluate what you've done. So he's telling his followers, you need to work like I am coming back, and I'm coming back soon. It's interesting that Peter, again, in really what 2 Peter 2, actually the whole book is 2 Peter, but 2 Peter 2 also parallels this discourse where he says, when you see what happened in Sodom and Gomorrah, and you see what happened in Noah's flood, and you see those events, how do you think you ought to live? Keep yourself right with God. Keep yourself in holiness, and keep yourself ready, for he's coming. Don't grow lax, he says, like some have. And I'm going to talk more about that next week, just the idea of how we prepare ourselves then. And then, and again, I don't think the parable of the talents is necessarily salvation loss, but it's the opportunity to position ourselves in a pleasing manner for God when he returns. And then the last thing he refers to is judgment of the nations. When the King of Kings will come and judge the nations, he will judge the kings of the earth, and he will make a distinction between sheep nations and goat nations. What qualifies a nation to be a sheep nation, and what qualifies one to be a goat nation? I think it goes back to that first sign, Israel coming back into the promised land. Those nations that sponsor the permanent establishment of Israel once again in the promised land become and find refuge for the Jews are the ones who will be sheep nations, and those who go to war to divide Israel or to persecute Israel become goat nations. Now, I don't know if I'll take this tangent someday. I really want to, and I'm praying about it, because the events in the United States can be separate and distinct from the events we're going through now, but they can be happening at the same time. I believe God always had in mind, before the United States was a nation, it had already set itself to be a place of refuge for the Jewish people and all peoples who were suffering persecution. And it had continued in that for years. In fact, when Israel became a nation, I want to say it was Eisenhower, but I think it was Truman maybe, who wanted to be like an Esther, where he could go and fight on behalf of the Jewish people and create a sanctuary for them. And how we were always there for Israel, and our own country is a place of refuge for them, and our relationship with their nation. But lately we've turned from that. It's even been in headlines recently that the world no longer owes Israel protection. That is not a good position. I wish we wouldn't agree with that. But I'm confident that the Lord wants us to end up as a sheep nation, and so that the Lord will bring us to a place of repentance so we can get back into alignment, because I don't think the Lord is willing to throw away over 300 years of U.S. history for a decade of bad behavior. I believe the Lord wants us to come back into alignment. But we want to be one of those nations. And then Jesus ends up saying, in the end, of chapter 25, when you've done it unto the least of these, my brethren, you've done it unto me. And I know that he's talking about brothers and sisters in Christ, but I also know he's talking about blood relatives, the Jewish people. When you've created a refuge for them, you've created one for me. And I will never forget that. Well, so I'm talking fast, and I'll just give a quick summary on a couple of things that I want you to ponder. And then as you break into fellowship and just have time with one another, maybe you would take a moment to pray for one another and see if there's any prayer needs or requests. Give a high five to somebody, give them a big hug, just look forward to them, break some bread and have some food with them. It'll be a great time. And just be a listener and see what people want to tell you. But let me summarize it with this. In Jesus' first coming, we saw the Star of Bethlehem. There was a sign in heaven. The constellation Virgo, I believe, was crowned with the sun and had the moon at her feet. Jupiter was in her womb and was in retrograde, and then Jupiter left between the Virgo's legs like giving birth, and Jesus was born. In Jesus' first coming, the angels announced peace on earth and to men of goodwill, peace on earth. Jesus said it was the year of Jubilee out of Isaiah 61. And yet Jesus came in a muted way where the glory of God was evident, but it was concealed. Now in Revelation 12, we have a similar constellation set up. We have Virgo with Leo crowning her head, and then the sun's at her head and the moon's at her feet, and Jupiter is once again in her womb, going retrograde, and will pass through, and she will give birth again. Only this time it is a sign for upheaval in the earth. Peace in the church, but upheaval in the earth. It is not the year of Jubilee. It is the continuation of that verse in Isaiah 61, 1 and 2, where it becomes the day of vengeance of our God. And it is no longer God's glory concealed, but it is his glory revealed like a lightning strike that covers the sky. Nobody's going to miss it, and everybody will see it. It's a wonderful story. We are living in the moment of it. And next week we'll talk about how do I align myself in my passion? How do I draw upon God's help to do what I can't do, and that is be the person of God he wants me to be, and just see great things take place. This is a time of great peace and great joy for those who know the Lord, even while the world around us is looking for an ark to enter, and you and I are going to be that ark. Well, God bless you. I want to point out too, in the notes there's a prayer to say out loud if you want to begin a relationship with Jesus Christ. If you don't know that, please read those words to a friend or just read them to the Lord himself, and you can find security in your relationship with Jesus Christ and begin this journey and finish strong in the days we have before us. Well, God bless you. Have a great rest of the day, and I miss those who I'm not seeing in person, and we'll get together soon. God bless.